First question, where were you born and when?
I was born in Mexico City in 1954.
And this way more. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. What were your childhood and teenage years like growing up?
My childhood was very, I'll say, happily chaotic. When I was just about 2 years old, my father came here first and found work, and then we joined him a few months after, so that would be in 1956. And he was working for IT&T, so he loved to travel, and it was a perfect match because they sent him all over the place. And so those first few years of my childhood, early childhood, we were traveling all over the United States. We lived for a while in Flemington, New Jersey on a farm. We lived in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. We even got to live in Puerto Rico for 2 years. They sent him there. But it was a very unsettled life, and that only worked for the time that my sisters and I were little. We needed to start going to school regularly. So actually we went back to Mexico in the early 60s, and then we came back to the United States in 1963. And we were illegal immigrants. Back then, everything was very open. The plan was, like for many immigrants, to just come here for a little bit and then go home. And my father had a tremendous admiration for American science, American culture. He taught himself English, and he thought that his girls, there's 4 daughters, would it be great if they learned English and they could go back home and be bilingual secretaries. So that was the plan. So it didn't happen that way, but that was the early childhood. From the 60s on, we lived in Chicago in the inner city, and I went to public school through high school, from 5th grade to high school. That's when my schooling really starts continuously. And we're talking the late 60s, early 70s, and to be in the public schools in Chicago at that time was pretty rough. That was the 60s were a very painful decade with a lot of conflict, and the schools I went to there were kids of all races. And I remember very clearly when Martin Luther King was shot, when Fred Hampton was murdered, our school exploded. So it was very, very rough. And then I graduated in 67. No, I graduated in 71. See, this is old age. And then I went to Loyola of Chicago at the Lakeshore campus.
Moving my seat.
Alright.
I'll scoot over.
I'll ask you.
And I just want to say, if you need to do this again another time, that's fine too, okay?
Okay. Okay. I mean, it shouldn't take too long.
Oh, no, this is fine, yeah.
I'm looking through the viewfinder, I can see. Now we're good. This was bad. This is like a hot
Okay.
Okay.
You had mentioned a little bit about John F. Kennedy before. Can you just kind of describe what that time was like when he was assassinated?
Well, I think that if you watch that TV series Mad Men, that really captures the spirit of the 60s. That's very, very accurate. I think that America back then, even though there was still a lot of Jim Crow, and we're talking the civil rights movement going on, we were in the heart of that. I think it was a finer country. I think that there was more decency. I think you could shame people into feeling empathy for the downtrodden. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's just lost that sense. It's too bad, but I don't find it to be. I love this country, but if I compare it to my memory of growing up, and it is memory, there was a lot more hope back then. I think that's why the 60s happened. The kids really thought we could change things, you know, and it wasn't just us. It was in Europe. I mean, Paris, 1968. I don't think people have that sense anymore. I think, but I could be wrong, you know, hope springs eternal. But back then, as bad as things were, and there were, you know, horrible killings in Mississippi, and we would hear about that in the news, and the Vietnam War, I think there was more, I had much more of a sense of the decency and the generosity of American people, that you could bank on that, and I don't see that anymore, unfortunately.
I think we'll kind of shift gears to your documentary. I don't know if we, could be just us and our ignorance, but I don't know if we ever received the name of your documentary, and kind of if you could just explain for the interview's sake, what it's about, how you got started telling the story, and why you wanted to tell this story.
Well, the name of the documentary is The Boxcar People. And it's kind of a little riff on The Boxcar Children, that book for children. But this is The Boxcar People, and it's being made by the Peoria PBS station. And we got started on it, I just feel so lucky. It was by pure luck and being in the right place at the right time, things converging. My husband and I had moved here from Chicago about 4 or 5 years ago. We didn't have jobs, but we didn't need to have jobs because we'd done fine selling our big house. So we had leisure, and we discovered this topic, that there had been Mexicans who worked for the railroad, and they lived in boxcar camps. And when I heard that, and that the boxcar people were still around, you know, from that time in Galesburg, and when I heard that, I had always been interested in Mexican immigration. Wherever I've gone, I always go and find the Mexicans, you know, and ask about it. And so when I heard that, I just thought, well, you know, I have time, and we're fine. We're not terribly in great shape, but we could afford to do this. So I called the mayor, Mayor Garza of Galesburg, and he's Mexican American, and he put me in touch with Julie King of the National Railroad Hall of Fame. She put us in touch with Susan Toomey of the Buchanan Center for the Arts, and with Bill Baker of the Peoria PBS station. And it was, everything fell into place. And suddenly, where we thought we'd have to make the documentary, because we always thought it had to be a documentary, suddenly we have top-notch people filming and doing the recording. So.
Let's see. I know you're newer to the Monmouth community, and these people don't have to be in the Monmouth community, but who would be somebody that you would describe as a community role model?
Well, actually, you know, since I've come to Galesburg, there have been a lot of people with a lot of really just these sterling civic histories of volunteering and just being very selfless. And there's a woman named Rose Hobenwelch. She was a school teacher. I think she taught something like 50 years, or I don't know, but she taught for a long time in Galesburg. And it was I see her as a kind of a Jane Addams figure, because she really took it upon herself to look out for the kids, the African-American kids and the Mexican kids. They couldn't check books out of the library because the people were afraid they wouldn't bring them back. So they couldn't check them out. And so she went and got them to get their library cards. And you should see, actually, that's one of the, I don't know if we have it in the documentary, but this man, Jesse Luna, who gets very emotional when he remembers. He almost turns into a little kid again. He just cries when he remembers how happy he was, how he couldn't check books out, and what it meant. So she's one person.
What have been some of your challenges in creating this documentary within the community?
I think my own thing is I really do feel bad that I can't give it all my time, you know. But then, you know, I got a job in publishing, you know, shortly after we came here, and then I got this job here, and it's been full-time work, and I've had to do that, you know. But that's been a challenge, just my own time. A challenge has been figuring out how to be diplomatic watching people's emotions and their reactions and being sure you're not offending anybody and trying to, you're always on your guard that you're forgetting something, or you're very observant to be sure that you're on their good side, and you don't know when you've gotten on their bad side too. That's the other part. So that's been a challenge. You just have to use all your powers to try and figure things out, and then you have to step back and say, did I imagine something? Am I wrong? And that's where having a partner, my husband working with me, tremendous, because there's so many things. We correct each other. We check with each other on what we feel about things and on how we're going to do things. If I were doing this, I don't think one person could have done this documentary alone. It's more than, it's been two people.
When you were creating this documentary, what was one of your most compelling interviews that you conducted with one of the Latino community members?
Well, there were a lot, and unfortunately, we had to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. There's going to be a special features disc or something where we can put that in, but there's one man, again from the Luna family, the brother of Jesse Luna. His name is Carlos Luna, and Carlos is just a delightful, I just find old people wonderful, and I just love to ask them what their lives were like. So Carlos is I think he's close to 80, maybe, or in his early 80s. I don't remember, but he fought in Korea, and he enlisted. And his family was living in the Santa Fe camp. And when he enlisted, and I think he was just like out of high school or something, I mean, we're talking about kids, his goal was that he didn't want his family to live in the Santa Fe camp anymore. It was time to move on. So he enlisted with the thought that, and he signed up to be a paratrooper, had never been in a plane ever before. He's going to be a paratrooper, and that's what he was. And for every jump that he made, he was paid $50. So his jump pay, he sent home, and that paid for a house for his family to move into. So that when he returned, they weren't living in the Santa Fe camp anymore. They were in their own house. And when he remembers that, I'll tell you, it's just, I get overcome. It's tremendous.
Can you elaborate on one aspect of culture which you learned about during filming?
Well, one thing that I learned just as a Mexican, and I am a Mexican immigrant, and I still miss Mexico, even though most of my life has been outside it, is how ingrained the sense is, and probably this has to do with family. You grow up very close with this total bond, with your family, and many things of the culture get passed down and preserved. And even though my experience as an immigrant is very different from the people I interviewed, because the generation that I interviewed, they're already American citizens. They were born here. They're like the greatest generation. That's who we interviewed, and they are much more like European immigrants because their families came and settled in one place. They had railroad jobs or industrial jobs. So my experience was very different from theirs. But when we got down and started talking, it was just amazing how we'd remember a saying or a song or something, or the way to cook something. We'd have these long conversations about no, you don't make the enchiladas. Oh, you make the enchiladas that way. And that entertained us. We loved that. So I think what it is, and I'm speaking about Mexican culture, but how ingrained your culture is, you don't realize it until you have this kind of experience like I did.
What aspects of the community do you appreciate here, either in Galesburg, or in that community, or within the Monmouth College community, or just Monmouth community?
Well, I'm getting to know Monmouth, and I'm liking Monmouth very much. We stayed in Galesburg pretty much because we're fixing our old house. But I like Galesburg. I think people are very friendly out here. Having been raised in the city, very courteous.